John has always blessed us with his messages. He asked, what would you like me to talk on this year? And the fallacy of early detection, I think, will be a fascinating topic. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome to our podium again, Dr. John Mcdougall. Thank you.
And good afternoon. It's going to be a little different afternoon for you. You know, I was challenged by Danny to present to you folks. You're a little different audience than the usual audience I talk to. You're a lot more sophisticated. You've heard about the importance of diet and lifestyle for years. And so for me to stand up here and tell you the same thing again would probably not get your interest. So I picked some other subjects that I think will get your interest, but guaranteed you won't leave here bored. But you might leave here mad at me. But just to kind of review a little bit, let me just give you a perspective here. So those of you who haven't been here before and don't know me, let me just kind of fill you in about who I am and what I want to do. I'm an internist, a board-certified internist, a medical doctor, and I'm nothing else. I'm not a holistic doctor. I'm not an alternative medicine doctor. I'm just an internist. But what I do is I take care of people like you were my brother or sister, like you were my father or my wife. I take care of you from the point of view of how I would like to be taken care of. I don't want to be abused by the medical business. I want the cure for problems. I don't want the pills and the potions. You know, and I know that's what you want also, and I have the privilege of practicing that way. So, you know, think about me just as a regular general type of doctor, because that's the kind of person that I am. To summarize what I see as the problem is that the human being was designed over, guess how many years, I'm not going to get into that with you, but over many years, to say the least. The human being came about in this world interacting with the environment and with a particular diet. And that diet has radically changed over the last 100 years. The diet that we now eat in this country was once reserved for kings and queens. Now you picture the royalty of the past. Do you remember what they looked like? Remember the fat man sitting on the throne with his gout-inflicted foot? Well, that's the problem. The problem is that in our country we've become so wealthy that we've all been able to live and eat like kings and queens. And so most Americans look like kings and queens. What would you expect? That's the problem. The solution to the problem is also simple. All you have to do is stop doing the things that make people sick, and then they get well. And so if you put people back on the diet that human beings were intended to eat, and you can figure that out from the Bible, you can figure it out by looking around the world. You look around the world and you see different populations of people. You see what they eat. You see how they look. And you come to the conclusion that the Asians are the trimmest, youngest, healthiest, hardest working people that you've ever seen. And they live on a diet of rice and vegetables. And then those people from Korea and Japan and China, they leave their native lands, they move to the United States, they come to your hometown, they give up the rice and the vegetables, and instead they eat the meats and the dairy. And what happens? They get fat and sick, just like the rest of Americans. Now, if you just reverse that migration and you took people in your hometown and you moved them back to, say, rural Japan, and you put them out in the fields, you had them work in the fields, you had them eat with that farm family 3 times a day, rice and vegetables, what would happen? They'd lose weight, their headaches would go away, their indigestion would go away, their diabetes would go away if it was type 2 diabetes, their multiple sclerosis attacks would stop, their rheumatoid arthritis would go away, their atherosclerosis would reverse, their chest pains would stop, their blood pressure would come down. Why? Because you're not supporting that sickness anymore with the rich American diet that got them in trouble in the first place. That's what my whole practice is about. I am the luckiest doctor in the world. I will tell you why I'm the luckiest doctor in the world is because my patients get well. I get to realize the dream of every doctor, and that is to help people. Now, I have to admit it's not easy to get people to commit to what I do, but once they do, they get well. They get off their medications in most cases. They lose excess weight. The body starts functioning properly, just like the analogy that I gave you of that migration from the United States back to rural Japan. This is no mystery. This is not some complicated biochemical theory that we're talking about. It's something that you can observe and prove to yourself. So I've been doing this for over 25 years now. I've taken care of thousands of people. And universally, people get well when they make these changes. It's a rare person that doesn't realize these benefits. But it's tough to get people to do this. And so Mary and I, you'll meet Mary if you stop by the booth over there. Mary and I have spent the last 25 plus years trying to figure out ways to get you to do what you know you're supposed to do. And that's hard, okay? And so we've written books, we put out the audio tapes, which is probably the least expensive and the most effective thing we've ever done. And then we have the lockup program. And believe me, the ultimate as far as getting you well is the lockup program. We're happy to do that if you'd like. Okay, now my subjects today are a bit different. You've never heard these presentations before. My subjects today are early detection and risk factors, which is the first talk. And then the second talk is more than you ever wanted to know about your bowels. I really wish I would have reversed the order, because I'm afraid that some of you, after I get done with the first presentation, are going to walk out of here and say, I never want to hear that guy again. Because I'm going to offend some of you, I really am. I'm going to take away your hopes and dreams. And I'm sorry for that, but I really would like to give you the truth. So let's see what happens. Let's see how many people I still hold here. What we want to do, we'd all like to have a crystal ball. We want to know what the future is. I hear people tell me all the time, if I'd have known I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself. So if we could predict what's going to happen to us in the future, we could make adjustments so we had the chance to live better and healthier, couldn't we? And so we're always looking for ways to predict what's going to happen to us. And we do that in two ways. One is by looking at risk factors like cholesterol, blood pressure, triglycerides, uric acid. And the other is by screening for disease, early detection techniques, such as looking for artery disease with these ultra-fast CT scans, doing pap smears, doing mammograms, breast self-examination, PSAs. So we're looking for future health problems based upon risk factors and early detection screening. Let's start with risk factors. This is very important that you understand what risk factors are, because the whole medical business is designed to treat risk factors. That's what I was taught to do. Why am I taught to treat risk factors? Because there's a lot of money in it. That's why. I'm taught to treat your elevated cholesterol, your elevated triglycerides, blood pressure, because there are drugs for that. I'm taught to treat your decreased bone density, because there are drugs to do that, and drug companies are out there selling me and every other doctor and every patient now on TV and radio to buy their drugs to treat risk factors. But that's not what we should be treating. What we should be treating instead of risk factors is we should be treating the underlying problems. Risk factors are signs, they're not problems. Just like road signs, like stop signs, yield signs, be careful going around the curve signs. These are signs. They are not diseases. They are not illnesses. Yet we treat them as if we are. People are constantly worried about their cholesterol and their blood pressure and their triglycerides and their blood sugar. They totally focus on that. They focus on it even to the point of forgetting what they're really trying to do, which is to get healthy. I have never, ever in my whole career, I've never met anybody die of high cholesterol. Never seen a person die of high cholesterol. Have you? I've never seen anybody die of high blood pressure. I can only imagine what death from high blood pressure would be like. I saw a movie maybe 10 years ago. It was called Scanners. It was a science fiction picture, and these people, they got all nervous and their heads blew up. I've never seen a patient die of high blood pressure. I've never seen a patient die of high blood sugar. I've never seen a patient die of high triglycerides or high homocysteine levels. I never have, and neither have you. What do people with these signs die of? Yeah, they die of rotten arteries. They die of diseased tissues. Now, these signs can give you information, but they should not be the total focus of your attention. Just like when you go to school, you get an A on a report card, that means most likely you learned the subject. But it doesn't necessarily mean that. You could have had a photographic memory or you could have cheated. But it's a sign that you learned the subject. What's really important, you've heard this all along, it's not the grades you get, but that you learned the subject, right? It's the same thing with these signs. What's really important is your body is healthy, not that you treat the signs. Now, unfortunately, we're so focused on signs that we do things like this. We treat people to the exclusion of their good health, and we brag about the fact that their signs are normal. I have seen many times, and I know there are doctors in this group here, and you've seen it too, and that is there's a patient, imagine this scene, there's a patient lying in the intensive care unit, dying of heart disease, and the doctor thumbs through his or her chart and says, well, look, I kept their blood pressure normal for all these years. So you have a dying patient who's had a normal blood pressure. Now, how good do you feel about that? Maybe you can't relate in that sense, but think about it this way. Say you were an emergency room doctor, and you're working late at night, and into the emergency room comes a very ill patient. They have a rip-roaring pneumonia. They've got an infection, pus, infection in their lung tissues. And so you say to your nurse, you say, nurse, I want you to check this patient out. Go take the temperature. Nurse comes back and says, doctor, this patient has a temperature of 104. So you sit down and think it all over and you say, I know what to do. Nurse, give the patient aspirin. And what you'll have in the next few hours is a dead patient with a normal body temperature. Now, how good do you feel about that? But that's essentially what's being done to you when you go to the doctor, is you're being given aspirin for pneumonia instead of draining the abscess and giving antibiotics which will cure the underlying disease. And when you cure the underlying disease, the temperature comes down. And so it is with our health problems. You can go to the doctor can give you something for cholesterol, something for blood pressure, something for uric acid, something for triglycerides, throw in a little folic acid for homocysteine, and your signs go down. But the data shows you have been helped very little. For example, treating high blood pressure does not reduce the risk of dying of heart disease. Reduces the risk of stroke a little bit. Not a lot, just a little bit. Yet you have corrected the blood pressure, so to speak. You put it down to where normal is. Unfortunately, when people treat signs, they also cause problems. For example, most of you who are on blood pressure pills here today are being overtreated, I would guess. You see, because your doctor thinks that your blood pressure should be what normal is when you're not taking medication. You see, normal without medication is, say, 110/70 or less. You may go to the doctor initially with a blood pressure of, say, 170/110. And the doctor says, you need blood pressure pills, which rightly you do. So the doctor gets in there and does his or her job, starts giving you the blood pressure pills, giving you the blood pressure pills, giving you the blood pressure pills. Well, your blood pressure comes down and down and down and down, and then it reaches 110/70, just like somebody without high blood pressure, without medication. You say, see, I'm normal again. But what you don't realize is that when you overly treat high blood pressure, you kill people. There's something called the J phenomenon of mortality. What it means is this. As you lower the blood pressure, you lower the risk of dying of heart disease until you lower the bottom number to about 85 to 95 millimeters of mercury. Once you get to 85 or 95 millimeters of mercury, if you lower it further, say to 80 or 75 or 70, that's the bottom number. Remember, only on medication I'm talking about now. As you lower it further, you increase the risk of dying of heart disease. So that the person with a bottom number treated as low as 60 has twice the risk of dying of heart disease as somebody with a bottom number of 100. Why? Well, very simple. The body is trying to compensate for some very serious illness. When you eat the rich American diet, what happens is your system gets all clogged up. Your blood vessels get all clogged up. The blood sludges. You've seen that. If you've seen my presentations in the past, or if you watch the video set, you'll see how when you eat fat, all the blood cells stick together in clumps and sludge the system. The arteries go into spasm. And as a consequence of all that resistance that you cause in your tissues, the heart says, look, I've got to get blood. I've got to get oxygen and nutrients to that tissue. The only way I can do it is I have to overcome that resistance. And I will do that by increasing the pressure in the system. That's what it does. It's normal and a natural thing to do. Well, instead of the doctor and the patient dealing with the sludged system with this high peripheral resistance, what we do instead is we knock down the signs. We treat the high blood pressure. We treat the high blood pressure with blood pressure lowering medications. And it gets to the point where you poison the system so badly that it can't do its job. And so you increase your risk of dying of heart disease. As you lower the pressure with drugs, you decrease the body's ability to perfuse the tissues, including the heart tissues. And as a consequence, you're deprived of nutrients that the body needs, and you die. And that's why over-aggressively treated high blood pressure, in other words, treating the sign, can be very much in your bad interest. So understand, you don't want to treat signs. What you want to do is you want to treat the underlying problems. And so when I take care of patients, as I told you, I'm just a general doctor. When I take care of patients, I don't fill them up with a bunch of drugs to treat their signs. I want something bigger for my patients than that. I want them to be well. And so what I do is I change the cause of their problem. The cause of their problem is eating like kings and queens. As a consequence, they get fat, they get the gout, they get diabetes, they get high blood pressure, they get really sick, as the kings and the queens of the past have been. I take their rich food away from them. I tell them that they can't have any more turkey until Thanksgiving of 2003. I ask them to go for a walk. I feed them the diet that the human being thrives on. That's a diet based on starches like rice, corn, potatoes, beans, peas, lentils, breads, whole wheat pastas, with the addition of fruits and vegetables. I ask them to give up bad habits like cigarette smoking and alcohol. In other words, I stop the toxins on the system. And as a result, the body does what it's supposed to do, something normal and natural. The body doesn't want to be sick, it wants to be healthy. If you are sick, then you have to assume that what's going on is you're taking improper care of yourself because your body wants to be healthy. Oh, you may assume something else. You may assume that God made a horrible mistake. I hear this all the time. The reason I have high blood pressure is because I have a genetic disease. My Creator was not very smart. He gave me a genetic problem. You can believe that if you want. You can also believe in bad luck or the wrath of God, which may well be true. But you could believe in something that you can do something about, and that is how you take care of yourself. And if you do the right things, what happens is the body will do the normal, natural thing it's supposed to do. In other words, all that circulation will become unsludged. The blood won't stick together as it does when you feed a high-fat diet. The arteries don't go in spasm. The atherosclerosis cleans out. Now you've opened up this huge peripheral bed. What happens is the pressure drops because the resistance is gone. And the sign decreases. Now you have to be real speedy about getting off your blood pressure pills as this happens, otherwise you're going to stand up and fall over in your mashed potatoes. Okay, so I want to make it absolutely clear the difference between signs and diseases because the entire medical business is based on treating signs. Now the interesting thing about these signs is they all have the same underlying cause. The elevation of these signs or the waving of the signs has the same underlying cause. Let's go through it for a minute. One of the signs of poor health is high cholesterol. Where does high cholesterol come from? It comes from eating a high cholesterol diet. Where's cholesterol? It's in meat products. There's no cholesterol in any plant food at all. It's only in cheese and beef and chicken and pork and eggs and lobsters. That's where cholesterol comes from. So you eat cholesterol, and in most people what happens is their cholesterol goes up. So there's a sign. Lipoprotein A is another sign for an increased risk of heart disease. It occurs as a consequence of eating too much meat, too little vegetables. High homocysteine levels. We'll get to that in just a minute. Homocysteine is the new favorite sign. Everybody talks about their homocysteine level these days. And they're taking folic acid. They're putting folic acid in our flour products to help fortify the diet with folic acid so that we can reduce some very serious problems. For example, when you fortify the bread, I was just reading yesterday, when you fortify the bread, you decrease the incidence of neural tube defects. That's where children are born with no brain or spina bifida. Absolute tragedy. You decrease the risk of neural tube defects by about 20% But how about the other 80% of the women that have these children with neural tube defects? How about them? We ought to be able to do better than that. If the solution to the problem was putting folic acid, a vitamin, in the bread, then it would be 100% reduction, because the whole population gets it. But no, it's only at 20%. Other signs: elevated blood sugar. The blood sugar goes up when you eat this high meat, low fiber American diet. So does the uric acid. You know about gout and uric acid and how that goes up when you eat the American diet. Then there are signs like obesity. There's abdominal obesity they talk about. You know, when you get it around your belly, it's much worse. It's a greater predictor of you dying of heart disease. Elevated blood pressure. Arcus senilis, there's another one. You ever seen people with these gray rings in their cornea? As you're talking to somebody sometimes, you notice a little sheen in their eye. Look carefully. They'll have a gray ring around the cornea. That's the deposition of cholesterol in the cornea. A sign. Ring of old age. Arcus senilis. Male or baldness is another sign, and premature aging. One of the things that you may have noticed when I talk to you about the Asian people is that Asian people generally look younger than people in this country. Asians who live in this country look much older than Asians who live back in China, Japan, etc., because of the diet. Okay, now let's talk about one of these signs for a minute that may have confused you. One of the more popular signs these days has to do with an amino acid. And that amino acid is homocysteine. And so the new pet thing for doctors to do when you have heart disease or you have a tendency towards heart disease is to put you on folic acid pills to lower your homocysteine level. Well, there's a better way to deal with it than that. You could deal with the cause instead of just treating the sign, which is the elevated homocysteine. So let's take a look at this for a minute. Let's see how homocysteine works. If you look at the homocysteine here, homocysteine is made from methionine. Methionine is the original amino acid that goes to make homocysteine, which eventually goes to cysteine, which is the final amino acid, which is excreted from the body as cysteine. Now, methionine comes from meat. Most of the methionine in our diet comes from meat. For example, for the same number of calories, chicken has 7 times as much methionine as rice. For the same number of calories and the same amount of protein, meat has 4 times as much methionine as beans. So your methionine comes primarily from your meat. So what we're talking about to increase the homocysteine levels, what we're talking about here is we're talking about increasing the amount of methionine in the diet, which goes to form more homocysteine. So how do we get the homocysteine to get in the form where it's excreted from the body as cysteine? Well, what we do is we use certain vitamins that come from the food, like folic acid, which allows the conversion of homocysteine to cysteine. Well, where does folic acid come from? It comes from foliage. So if you eat more foliage, in other words, more plants, what happens is this conversion from homocysteine to cysteine is more rapid. So you get rid of the homocysteine. So what we're talking about here is a high meat, low plant food diet. So rather than you being confused about the situation, you step back, and I'm sure if you understand the details, the underlying issues here, what you'll understand is that all of these signs waving up here are pointing at the same thing. And that is a high meat diet, which raises cholesterol, triglycerides, blood sugar, makes you fat, gives you abdominal obesity, arcus senilis, and so on. And a low plant food diet, which gives you the same things. So now you know how to respond, and that is to deal with the underlying cause. Now let's talk about screening. Various kinds of screening that we have today are quite popular. For example, I saw in the newspaper today when I was thumbing through the Sunday edition from AmeriScan, I saw an advertisement that was very enticing. An advertisement that they would scan my whole body for $795. What a deal. I get to have a look inside my whole body. I get to look at my head. I get to look at my heart. I get to look at my bowels, particularly my colon, and look for polyps. And we believe that looking at these early lesions, these early parts of disease, or indications of disease by screening, that it will change our future. And it may, but unfortunately there are some risks to all this kind of screening. What you see here is you see a picture on your left of a body scan. You see the spine down at the bottom, which is the very white part. You see the heart, a little bit up towards the top, the big globule of the heart. And you also see the ribs there, which are the little tiny white markers there along the side. That's what a scan looks like. Now, in the next frame over where you see the heart scan, you see the arrow pointed at some calcification. And there are many of you that are going for these scans these days, and what you have to understand is there are some positive things and there are some negative things that can happen when you go for these scans, and you have to be prepared. I see folks all the time. They get these scans and they really aren't aware of what they're getting involved in. So I'd like to take a minute and share with you what you're getting involved in. Let's talk about the heart scan in particular, because that's one of the more popular ones, and I bet I could go through this audience here and I bet 10% of you have had a heart scan at least. You are very brave people to do this. Because what happens is when you get that scan, you may be given information that now you have to deal with, which could lead you to some very serious and sometimes fatal courses of action. Perfectly healthy person, you're walking around, everything's good, life is wonderful, love your kids love you, everything's wonderful. You go in and get a heart scan. Now they find these little bits of calcium in your arteries. Now what's happened? Now you become a cardiac cripple. Oh, you do. I mean, your thoughts day in and day out are about those calcium plaques in your arteries. You're afraid that you're going to drop dead. And because you're afraid you're going to drop dead, you've got to take some action. And so you go see the cardiologist. And the cardiologist, as kind as he or she is not going to let you risk having premature heart disease. So what are they going to do? They're going to take you to the cath lab. And they're going to do an angiogram on you. And there's a good possibility that they're going to find something that they can treat even more thoroughly. So they're going to do angioplasty. And maybe, as a complication of angioplasty, or maybe the heart surgeon getting his or her share of the business sends you off for bypass surgery. So here you go from one day, a perfectly healthy person, nothing wrong, not a care in the world, and you start on this treadmill that takes you off to potentially dangerous surgery, deadly surgery. Well, along the way, some things should be told to you. First of all, you should be told that what we're looking at in these scans, that little bit of calcium, that's old disease. That is non-lethal disease. That disease does not kill. Calcium represents chronic irritation. For example, you get calcium in your tendons from tendonitis for a long period of time. You get calcium in your breasts from constant stimulation of the breast, primarily from estrogens, and the body lays down calcium. If you get tuberculosis, you get calcium deposits in your lung. These calcium deposits, the presence of calcium in the tissues represents chronic inflammation. And that's what you're looking at in your heart, is you're looking at chronic disease. You're looking at disease that's happened over the last 20, 30, 40 years. You're looking at disease that's full of scar tissue and calcium and does not kill. The disease that kills, those of you who've heard my lectures before, and those of you who've seen the videotapes, you'll understand the disease that kills is the tiny little fat-filled plaques. The ones that began maybe a week ago or a couple of months ago. They're tiny little sores on the inside of the artery which have no calcium in them because they're new. So they're tiny little sores on the inside of the arteries, and what happens is these little sores, which you can think about like pimples on a teenager's face, these tiny little sores, they get overstuffed with fat and cholesterol and pus cells, and they burst. And as a consequence of bursting, they cause the blood to clot, and you get a blood clot in your heart artery, which we call a thrombus, and it gives you a problem called coronary artery thrombosis, which is the same name for a heart attack. So these heart scans cannot see the disease that kills you. So say, for an example, you were not a healthy-oriented person for many years, and you ate the rich American diet, and you caused chronic inflammation, which led to calcium deposits. Those calcium deposits are going to stay there. They're hard as a rock. Then you change your diet so you don't form any of these new lethal pustules in your arteries. So your risk of heart disease is virtually none. Or say you're the kind of person that doesn't lay down calcium, but you have all these little pustules in your heart arteries that pop and burst and you'll have a heart attack. And many people who have perfectly normal heart scans drop dead of heart disease. And that's why. You look at that heart scan, you say, how in the world could this hurt? How could I have any problems? I'm perfectly clean, and that's kind of what they tell you. But what they don't tell you is many, many, many people who drop dead of heart disease have perfectly clear scans with not a speck of calcium. Why? Because that chronic disease is not the killing part of the disease. So be careful when you go get one of these scans, because you could end up as a cardiac cripple, and you could also end up in heart surgery. But the scan may be of value to you, and sometimes I encourage people to get them, but only if I'm there to help them. One thing that it may do if you get a scan is it may motivate you to eat well. And this is always something that we need to talk about. When we look at screening tests, this is a screening test for heart disease. When we look at screening tests, these tests can provide a very serious motivation for you finally taking account of the way you're living and eating. And that's good. But really, I don't think you need to be scared anymore. I think you should know enough how important it is to eat well. But if you're not, if you need to be scared more, there's a whole medical business out there dedicated to doing it for you. The other thing that I use these heart scans for is to help people decide on cholesterol-lowering medication. I have people come to see me and they have sometimes high cholesterols. And I tell them when they have a high cholesterol, I tell them, I'm going to make a guess right now. I'm going to guess whether or not you need cholesterol-lowering medication. It's only a guess because there's not enough data for me to tell you with any certainty that these are going to benefit you. But I'm going to guess. Let me tell you some examples. For example, if you were a young woman, you were still menstruating, and you came to see me with a high cholesterol, even if you had a history of chest discomfort, I'd probably tell you, look, we don't have to be aggressive because it's extremely unlikely for a woman who's still in her reproductive years, still menstruating, to have heart disease. Why? Because God loves women who can have babies. But after menopause, that love affair ends. And as a consequence, women have just as high a chance of getting heart disease at the same cholesterol level as men postmenopausal years. So likely I would guess, even if your cholesterol is high, that you don't need more aggressive therapy. Sometimes I have people come in to me, they've had a history of a heart attack, they've had stents and angioplasty, maybe even bypass surgery, and their cholesterol is down low, say around 170. Hey, my guess is you probably need some help. And I will encourage cholesterol-lowering medications. Now, believe it or not, many of my patients do not agree with my guesses. As a matter of fact, they get rather upset with me because they had something else in their mind as to how they'd like to be treated. For example, people who come to my clinic, they come there to get off their drugs, and in almost every case, they get off their drugs. So they come to me, and I put them on a medication. They say, hey, I didn't come here to get on medication. I came here to get off. I said, I understand that, but I'm a doctor. I'm an internist, and I treat you the best I can, using medications as carefully as possible. I think it's in your best interest. But believe me, you're not going to hurt my feeling if when you walk out the door, you throw it in the circular file. Now, you hurt my feeling if you walk out the door and don't follow a good diet and exercise. Very badly, you'll hurt my feelings. Other times, people will say to me, well, look, I think my cholesterol is too high. You didn't give me a cholesterol-lowering medication. So we talk about it. And I'm very concerned about what my patients think in terms of how they should be treated. So be careful when you get those heart scans done. Now, for the part of the presentation that is going to leave you changed, is going to leave you a different person, and likely may leave you with some very different feelings about me. It has to do with screening for cancer. 2 days ago, we came back from a trip in Alaska. We took 56 people on a small ship throughout the waterways of Alaska. Saw the glaciers and the bears and the whales. It was just a wonderful, wonderful trip. I gave this presentation to these people. And when we finished on Friday morning, 2 days ago, I was sitting at breakfast and I looked over at Bob. Bob, by the way, not only did he go to Alaska, but he and his wife went to Guatemala, which was a wonderful trip, by the way. If you ever get a chance to go to Guatemala, it's one of the most interesting, unruined countries I've ever been to. And we went there the past March. And so Bob heard a lot of my lectures in March, plus he'd been at the clinic before. So it's not that he wasn't familiar with me. And so I was sitting talking to Bob, and I said, now, Bob, you've heard this presentation about early detection in one form or another on at least 3 occasions. Let me ask you, when your next physical comes up, are you going to get a PSA test, prostate-specific antigen test for quote, a test for prostate cancer? He said, yes, I am. I said, but didn't you hear what I said? He says, I don't care, I'm still going to get it. He says, I want to know. And I know when I get done with this presentation, a very big share of you are going to have the same reaction. I don't care what the truth is. I know what I believe. And the medical business has spent billions and billions of dollars making sure you believe in very profitable information. And I know what you believe. Have a slide, please. What we're doing here is we're looking to hopes and dreams. We all want to be cured of cancer before it takes our lives. And we believe we can do that with early detection. I want that too, I really do. I would love as a doctor to be able to offer you screening techniques that would cure you, that would prevent you from suffering the horrors of cancer. Don't get me wrong. My intention would be none but to offer effective treatments or early detection tests. I would love to be able to do that. But if it doesn't work, I feel I have an obligation to tell you the truth. Now, I wasn't able to get the biblical sources of these statements, but I know there's someplace in the Bible, something about you will hear the facts and you will deny me. I think that's said someplace there. You'll deny the truth, you'll embrace false hopes, and you'll suffer many times over before you learn the truth, but eventually you'll learn the truth. And in the process, I'm going to get stoned. That's just the way it is. And so when I get done, feel free to throw away. But this is the truth that I'm going to share with you right now, whether you accept it or not. First, I have to mention to you that there are early detection techniques that do work. And keep this in mind as I talk to you about the false gods, the ones that don't work. There are early detection tests that I think make a difference. And the reason they make a difference is because they catch it before it is cancer. Once it's cancer, it's too late, as you'll see. They catch it before it's cancer. For example, you can do pap smears and you find cells on the cervix that are precancerous. They are not cancer. And if you treat these tissues, you can make a difference, I believe. There are a lot of doctors, by the way, who don't believe this. They think pap smears don't work at all, but I believe they do. And so I recommend that women get pap smears every 3 years, which is consistent with what the standard obstetrics organizations recommend around the world. Pap smears every 3 years until you're 50, 60 at the latest. But usually 50 is early enough to stop getting pap smears. Why? Because if your pap smears are normal up to the age of 50, likely cervical cancer will not kill you. It's a disease primarily of young women as a result of infection with a wart virus. And if you're free of any changes at age 50, you're not likely to develop cervical cancer. Plus, if you did, at age 50, it would take about 15 years for it to change from an abnormal smear to an actual cancer, and it would take another 15 years to kill you. So if you start at age 50 trying to deal with a disease you're going to die of at 80 or 90, how much benefit are you going to get? Not much. So in general, I recommend women should get pap smears every 3 years up until age 50, maybe at the most conservative recommendation to the age of 60, 62 years old. Colon polyps. Colon polyps are precancerous lesions. Polyps occur as a consequence of irritation of the mucosa, whether it's the mucosa of the nose, the cervix, the intestines. You irritate those surfaces and the cells proliferate into polyps. Just like you irritate the skin and you get calluses. That's the way that the epidermis or the skin, the squamous cells respond, is with calluses. But the mucous membranes, they respond by proliferating into lumps that we call polyps. And that constant irritation is also what causes the cells to degenerate into cancer. So you can find colon polyps, which are precancerous lesions, by checking the colon. like for example with these total body scans. I don't know how effective they are, I don't know the data on that, but that's the idea. Or you can get a double contrast barium enema and a sigmoid exam, which is what I recommend if you're going to check for colon polyps. Or you can get a colonoscopy, which your doctor will recommend who performs these tests because he or she will just make a whole bucket of money if you submit to it. I recommend that people get their colon checked sometime between the age of 55 and 60. Why? Because it's unlikely for you to have a problem before that age. It usually occurs in older people. If you have a test between age 55 and 60 and it's clear, and the test again that I recommend is a double contrast barium enema and a sigmoid exam, if it's clear, then if a polyp were going to start to develop at that time, it would take 15 years for it to become cancer and another 15 to kill you. So how many people are you going to help when you're dealing with a disease that kills in the 80s and 90s? Not many. So, I think that's reasonable to do. Now, by the way, I will not, myself, have a colon examination. Why? Because I haven't eaten for the last 30 years the diet that causes colon cancer, so I feel that I'm at very low risk. And percentage-wise, I know that's true, but of course we don't know our future, but that's the gamble that I'm willing to take. Leukoplakia in the mouth, again, a precancerous lesion, or you find the nevi on the skin. These are moles that can be precancerous, that you can catch and do something about. So there are the 4 early detection techniques that I believe do work. Now let's talk about the more common and profitable early detection techniques and see how they work. Many of you watch my television show. It's called Mcdougall, MD. It plays all over the country. I've been on for about 8 years. During our last filming, I had 2 of my heroes on. 2 of my heroes. There's Charles Wright, who's one of the most famous medical epidemiologists in the entire world, and also C. Barbara Mueller. C. Barbara Mueller is the father of breast cancer. These people have been my heroes for 30 years. And I was fortunate enough to host them on my television show. Well, these 2 guys got together, C. Barbara Mueller and Charles Wright. They got together and they published a paper in The Lancet. And The Lancet is the most prestigious medical journal in the world, bar none. It is the world medical journal as far as respect is concerned. And what they did is they looked at the studies on mammography. And they came to the conclusion after reviewing the studies that it didn't work. They looked at the studies, and we'll look at those in just a minute, and they came to the conclusion that the evidence does not support having mammograms done on women. And as they stated it, they said, since the benefit achieved is marginal, and the harm caused is substantial, and the costs incurred are enormous, we suggest that public funding for breast cancer screening in any age group is not justifiable. I mean, that's heresy. Charles Wright told me, he says he was giving a presentation in front of a huge group of doctors. After his presentation, one of the radiologists came up to him and said, buddy, I want you to know something. You're getting in my pocketbook, and I don't like it. And basically, that's the only response I've ever heard from the supporters of mammograms, is, buddy, you're getting in my pocket, and I don't like it. Because the facts are the facts. I continue to recommend mammograms for women in the age group between 50 and 63 up until January 8th of 2000, when the preliminary report on the Cochrane review came out in The Lancet. And when that report came out, I stopped recommending mammography for any woman. And now the final report is out. The final Cochrane report was published, as you can see here, in The Lancet in October of 2001. The Cochrane Review. The Cochrane is a Nordic review board, the most respected review board in the world. And they look at the data and they come to conclusions that are published, and the conclusions are well thought out, well researched, and relatively unbiased. And I know this one was completely unbiased because I've looked at the data too. What they said in 2000, which is the original report I read, January 8th of 2000 in The Lancet, we reported that there is no reliable evidence that screening for breast cancer reduces mortality. As we discuss here, a Cochrane review has now confirmed and strengthened our previous findings. The review also shows that breast cancer mortality is a misleading outcome measurement. Finally, we use data supplemental to those in the Cochrane Review to show that screening leads to more aggressive treatment. How much more clearly could it be said to doctors around the world and their patients? An editorial that accompanied that in the same issue, the editorial reviews the article and makes opposing comments, or at least they're supposed to, but they couldn't find any opposing comments. As a matter of fact, the editors of The Lancet were very upset because other members of the Cochrane board tried to suppress this information and tried to keep it from coming out to you. But The Lancet is governed by respectable, honest people, and they insisted on its publication. And so, the editor, he tells us, but women should not be expected to forgive old and disproven screening practices. Instead, women should expect doctors to secure the best evidence about the value of screening mammography. At present, there is no reliable evidence from large randomized trials to support screening mammography programs. Okay, so now we have a U.S. panel that looks at the data. This was published in the British Medical Journal. An independent panel of U.S. medical experts that writes information for the National Cancer Institute's online database has concluded that there is insufficient evidence to show that mammography prevents death from breast cancer. The panel, known as the PDQ, Screening and Prevention Editorial Board, is going to rewrite its assessment on mammography for the Institute's website in March. Well, this is why they came to the conclusion, folks. Let's take a look at the data. I realize this is small, hard for you to read, but let me tell you what we're looking at here is we're looking at the 8 studies that have been done on screening mammography, mammograms. Of the 8 studies done, 6 show no benefit. 2 show benefit. They're the earliest done studies, and therefore the ones that have the least rigorous of scientific protocol behind them. All of the more recent studies show no benefit. Of the studies done, there was only one designed to test women under the age of 50, and that was the Canadian study. The Canadian study, when they looked at the data, they found that the chance of a woman in the screen group of dying of breast cancer-related problems was 37% greater than those who did not get the mammography. That's what they found. Now, in The Lancet, which you can tell is one of my favorite journals, in The Lancet, in their editorial, they said the reason is not because of the radiation from the mammogram. No, siree. That's not the reason. The reason is those who are screened are more likely to be detected. And if you are detected, you are more likely to be treated, and treatment kills. Radiation, surgery, and chemotherapy kill. And that's why. These are the facts. Now, I have to tell you, since these facts have come out, particularly since the Cochrane Review, and they hit every single newspaper in the country, you have read this. But I want to tell you, the backlash has been huge. They are out there trying to save the business. The American Cancer Society, the people who are making buckets of money over this are swimming backwards to try and counteract this information. And they might win because they have buckets of money. Okay, how about breast self-examination? I mean, what could be harmful about just taking your fingers and running along your breasts? I mean, that seems like a normal, natural, healthful thing to do. Couldn't cause you any problem. But what we have here is we have a study published. It was in, I think, June or July of 2001. You've got the references right there. It was published in the Canadian Medical Association Journal. And the Canadian Task Force on Preventive Health Care looked at the issue of breast self-examination. And let's read what they had to say. They said 2 large randomized control trials, a quasi-randomized trial, a large cohort study, and several case control studies, that's unimportant, just all the studies, have failed to show a benefit for regular performance of breast self-examination or breast self-examination education compared to no breast self-examination. In contrast, there is good evidence of harm from breast self-examination instruction, including significant increases in numbers of physician visits for evaluation of benign breast lesions and significantly higher rates of benign breast biopsies. The studies, they're kind of interesting. There's one from Moscow, and I think the most interesting one is from Shanghai. They took 133,000 women, Chinese textile workers, and they said, you will check your breasts. They took another 133,000 and they said, don't touch your breasts. And they evaluated them over the years and they found there was no reduction in mortality, absolutely none. And the stage at which the cancers were found were the same in both groups. There was no advantage. There's no benefit. And you're sitting here thinking, how could that be? I know early detection works. I know it works. It only makes sense. This guy's got to be off his rocker. The Canadian Preventive Task Force, the Canadian Medical Association, the Lancet, the Cochrane Review, they have to be crazy. Why would they say such a thing? I know it works. I know you're thinking that. I know you're wishing that. Harm. You say it can't do any harm. Well, I was sitting talking to Bob about this. Bob, you know, my friend that went on the Alaskan trip, Friday morning at breakfast. I said, Bob, you still get a PSA, right? We haven't gotten to PSAs yet. We'll be there in a minute. You still get a PSA, right? He says, yeah. He says, no reason not to. I want to know. I want to know. You want to know. Okay, you want to know. Now, what happens when you find out, Bob? Now, let's just assume that the treatments don't work, which I'll show you they don't work in just a minute. But let's just assume they don't work. Now, what you've done is you found out about a disease that you can do nothing positive about. But what's happened to you now, Bob? Well, let's talk about what's happened to you, Bob. And Marcia, his wife, is sitting right next to him. I said, what's happened is this, Bob, is now you can't get life insurance. I mean, you were a perfectly healthy guy before this test. You were just fine, as far as you knew. Now you can't get health insurance. Now you can't get life insurance. You know that job you wanted to get? Well, they're not going to hire you because they don't want somebody with cancer working in their company. You got it? Now, Marcia, every time she looks at you, doesn't think about my loving husband, Bob. She thinks about my husband, Bob, with prostate cancer. That's what she thinks about, and so does everybody else, and so do you. You are no longer Bob. You are Bob with prostate cancer. That's who you are. And Bob, how about when they treat you? How are things going to go then? I mean, I don't know what your sex life is like, Bob, but I can tell you 100% of people treated for prostate cancer have sexual dysfunction. And most of them to the point where they can't get an erection. You think that's going to make Marcia happy? And I bet I know how she's going to really get happy. She's going to have a lot of fun changing your catheter because a very high percent of people are incontinent. If you don't have to wear a catheter, Bob, maybe she can get by with a diaper as you urinate all over yourself as a consequence of the therapy. Now, isn't that going to be great? But at least you know that you had prostate cancer. How about a woman? Same things for a woman, but now she lives without her breast. And the trauma, the surgery, the chemotherapy, the trauma of it all, the hours sitting in the doctor's waiting room, the days in the hospital, the complications from the therapy. This is not a benign thing. The reason I'm telling you this is I'm a doctor. My interest is in your health. And if there's something out there that is hurting you and not helping to you, I feel obliged to tell you, even though you do not want to hear this. I know you don't want to hear this, but it is the truth. Okay, the recommendations from the Canadian Task Force, you go look this up, just go to the internet. By the way, this is free. All of these articles that I just showed you are free. The Lancet almost always sells its articles, and so does the Canadian Medical Journal. They almost always do. They want to make money, right? But these articles are free on the internet. Why are they free? Because they want you to know the truth too. So you go online, you go to the National Library of Medicine, which is nlm.nih.gov, and you ask for these studies. You ask for the Cochrane Review, or just ask for mammography. You ask for the Canadian Task Force recommendations, or just ask for breast self-examination. Very quickly you'll find this. Or write down the numbers that I give you, the references, and go to the National Library of Medicine. You put in that reference, boom, it's right there. And you can print it right out. You print it out as a PDF file. And it's right there. NLM, National Library of Medicine, NIH, National Institute of Health, government.gov. So it's nlm.nih.gov. You can read these studies. You can go home tonight and read them. Okay, their recommendations is women between the ages of 40 and 49. Their recommendations for breast self-examination is because there is fair evidence of no benefit and good evidence of harm. There is fair evidence to recommend that routine teaching of breast self-examination be excluded from periodic health examination in women in this age group. Same thing for women 50 to 59. You're not supposed to do it. Now you say to yourself, well, how about, and I know you're sitting there thinking this, and people have said to me, but how about, I need to know if I have cancer. I need to know because it's going to encourage me to eat well. I mean, it wasn't that I was fat and had high cholesterol and constipation and arthritis. That wasn't enough. Tell me I have cancer, and then I'll do it. I mean, we've got to get real serious about this. We've got to be right on death's door because you don't want to change your diet because that's so radical to eat oatmeal and bean burritos. I mean, I'd do anything. I'd have my breasts cut off, my prostate cut off. I'd do anything that eats spaghetti and marinara sauce. I mean, good grief, you don't get radical on me, Mcdougall. There is another advantage to finding it early, and that is you can have a more cosmetically acceptable surgery. And these are advantages, but balance them against the harm, against the scars, the deformity of the breasts, or if you're found to have cancer, the amputation of the breast, the chemotherapy, the radiation that doesn't work. Balance it against the harm, the psychological harm, the loss of insurance. Balance it against the benefits, and you'll see this is morally wrong to do this to people. Okay, let's talk about prostate cancer. You guys, you thought I was going to let you off easy, didn't you? I mean, what could be so bad about just having a little blood taken out of my arm, having somebody stick their finger up my you-know-what? What could be so bad, right? This is easy. Well, let me tell you, it's going to change your life, especially if you find something wrong. Oh, it's all fine if nothing's there. Then you say, see, I beat it. Well, you didn't beat it. It just means it hasn't grown big enough to make the PSA or big enough for the finger to feel. That's all. It could still be there. Easily could still be there. You haven't found out anything that's worth your while. Okay, let's see. There was an article published in the San Francisco Chronicle, January 18, 2002. Maybe some of you saw this. The deputy editor and the editor of the Western Medical Journal, they published an article in the San Francisco Chronicle that really caused quite a stir. They said in the article, the U.S. Preventive Medicine Task Force, the most reliable source of advice on health screening, says that routine screening of men for prostate cancer is not recommended. It says it's not recommended. Yet every time you go to the doctor, you are admonished. You are told you're a bad person. You're an irresponsible father, an irresponsible husband for not getting your prostate checked. What are you doing to your family? You are a bad person for not doing this. Yet the U.S. Preventive Task Force says you shouldn't be doing it. And every doctor in the country should be reading that. They say the Canadian and British governments urge their doctors not to screen healthy men for prostate cancer. These are your current recommendations, folks. The PSA and the DRE, digital rectal examination, are incredibly accurate. In autopsy studies, 100% of men who die at the age of 100 have prostate cancer. See, this is the problem. The problem is this, as you're going to learn as we go along, and I might hold you over a little bit, I'm sorry, but you just got me going and I can't stop. The problem is this, is that you got the prostate gland, and as it ages, the cells go through some changes that look like cancer. In men my age, I'm 55 years old, but men over the age of 50, 30% have prostate cancer, and by age 100, as they say there, 100% of men have prostate cancer. Age 70, about 80% have prostate cancer. But who cares? It's never going to show up. In almost all the cases, it never shows up. So you die with an abnormal-looking prostate. What do you care? So most of you who have been treated for prostate cancer, there was never anything wrong. Never anything that would kill you. Ever. So you never had to be treated. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I know you're sitting here really mad. And you can be mad at me. I know you will be. That's okay. I planned on that before I decided to give this presentation, which is the first time I've really given it to a group. So those of you, however, who really do have truly life-threatening prostate cancer, they're not going to help you anyways, and I'll show you why in just a minute. So there's really no reason to test anybody, as these prestigious groups say. You think they came to this conclusion lightly? You think they didn't read the studies? You think they didn't think about it? You know, why would the Lancet, the Cochrane Review, the Canadian Medical Association, the Canadian Task Force on Medicine, the U.S. Preventative Health Task Force, why would they all come out and tell you not to do this? But I guarantee you, you go to your doctor tomorrow, I guarantee you, why didn't you get your mammogram? Why didn't you do breast self-examination? I guarantee it. They continue, they say in their study published in the January 18, 2002 San Francisco Chronicle article, when you look at the clinical evidence with an impartial gaze, it is clear that widespread PSA testing would be harmful to the health of American men, and the financial costs would be huge. Following this, we see advocates of PSA testing campaign to silence critics. They are not going to let this go unchallenged. You are talking about billions and billions of dollars. You think they're going to take it lying down? They've got all those expensive mammogram machines sitting there. They got all those PSA tests sitting there ready to be done. You think they're going to let it go? And hey, not just the tests, folks. Once we find it, then we can really make the bucks, man. We can do the surgery and the radiation, the chemotherapy. There are billions to be lost off of this, billions. So they are not going to take it lightly, and I guarantee you'll see article after article after article in the paper telling you just how wonderful these tests are and how bad the critics are. How bad are the critics? Advocates of prostate cancer screening have launched a national campaign to silence editors of the Western Journal of Medicine after the editors wrote an opinion in the San Francisco Chronicle. So what have they done to these people? Well, a British Medical Journal article says this. Many people in the United States think that screening is a panacea, a way of warding off disease and staying healthy, perhaps forever. Those who question this fairy tale view, as we recently discovered, are considered traitors and even murderers. On December 18, 2001, the San Francisco Chronicle published an article in its sports section about Dusty Baker. Is he the manager of what? Who's Dusty Baker the manager of? Giants, there you go, manager of the Giants. I knew that. What they wrote in there is these guys, what happens is they put out this article in the Chronicle, and the same day they got calls from major cancer organizations and health organizations from around the world asking UC Davis to fire these people. Fire them, get them out of there. By the end of the day, our email boxes were jammed with accusations, abuse, and threats. We were compared to Mcdougall and accused of having the future deaths of hundreds of thousands of men in our hands. Our view, one letter said, was genocide in the making. The president of a prostate cancer charity said that he would be asking supporters and legislators to look into our behavior. Many people wished ourselves would get prostate cancer. That's the reaction. This is big bucks on the line, folks. They're going to pull out all stops to make sure you don't know the truth. Well, what's the problem? The treatments don't work is one of the problems. Early detection is a fallacy. There are three major treatment options for localized prostate cancer: radical prostatectomy, radical radiotherapy, and monitoring with treatment if required. There is no randomized controlled trial evidence to suggest a survival advantage of any of these treatments, and each has risks. The problem is the treatments don't work, and it says so right here in this 2000 Lancet article, and essentially every other article you read. Let me tell you why. Now, this is the tough part of the lecture, okay? And I'm really sorry about this, but again, I came here with the assumption that some of you want to know the truth. And some of you want to live in a world of hopes and dreams. And I apologize. I sincerely apologize for any of you I've hurt your feelings. And I'm talking about you who have bought into the cancer business, into the treatments. You've been mutilated. You've been harmed in many ways. I am really sorry. But there are those of you who haven't been treated, and believe me, if you get this message, there really is some hope for you. You can change things. You're not going to change it by more radiation, more treatment. You're going to change it by dealing with the cause of these diseases. The cause of breast cancer is the rich American diet, just like prostate cancer. It's a rich American diet. And so even after you get cancer, if you change your diet, you'll change the course of the disease. Well, let me tell you how this works. Cells live in the body, they live in a very neighborly manner. They live in a neighborly manner, and they're not allowed to divide unless the body gives a stimulus to the cell. Say, you're allowed to divide because we need to grow bigger, and so then you're allowed to divide. Or if the body gives a message that, or excuse me, in another circumstance you're allowed to divide is, say, here's a cell and there's one next to it and it dies, you're allowed to divide and replace that cell. That's okay, that's part of the rules. But otherwise, cells aren't allowed to divide at their own free will. If they were allowed to divide at their own free will, then we'd all be misshapen masses in a matter of hours. We'd just be these lumps. And that's not allowed. Now, cells get injured. They get injured very badly, and most of them, they get injured very badly, they die. But sometimes a cell gets injured very badly, but not bad enough to die, but bad enough to stop obeying the rules. It stops obeying the rule about dividing any time at once, and so it divides at its own free will. Not like wildfire, no siree. It divides at a rate of about every 100 days. It's called the doubling time. So let's take and go through a little history of how cancer grows. First we have, it's not going to work. First we have, you see the one cell over there on the left where cancer begins? Okay, that's the first cell in the prostate or the breast that becomes cancerous. Always one cell leads the way. There are many behind it, by the way, that are turning into cancer all the time, but always one leads the way. Okay, so that cell divides into 2 cells in 100 days. 3.5 months later, it's now 4 cells. Another 100 days, it's now 8 cells. You've had cancer for almost a year, and you've got 8 cells lurking in a breast that contains 100 billion cells per breast. The prostate gland contains 100 billion cells. And you've got 8 cells in your tumor. It's obviously impossible to find. Divisions continue, 16, 32, 64. You've got now less than 100 cells in your cancer. You've had cancer almost 2 years. 100 cells lurking in an organ that contains 100 billion cells. You cannot possibly find it. Yet at these early stages, if it's truly cancer, what happens is it breaks out of the tumor, it goes into the bloodstream, not the lymph nodes, but the bloodstream, circulates through the body, it lodges in the brain, liver, lungs, bones, and it starts to double at a similar rate, an average of every 100 days. And it's the cells that spread, the metastases that kill, the cells that replace the lungs, move the brain aside. They're the ones that kill, not the cancer in the breast or the prostate. That doesn't kill. Now, when I say if it's true cancer, because most of cancer, let me take that back. A very high percentage of cancer that's being treated really isn't cancer. It's pre-cancer. For example, in men, I told you that nearly 100% of men have prostate cancer by the time they're 100, 70% at age 70, 30% over the age of 50. Most of that would never become a problem. They'd never see it. They'd die of something else first. Even though it looks like cancer in the prostate, it doesn't spread. In fact, if you look at cancer based on looking at the prostate gland for men around the world, you find that the distribution is pretty equal around the world. There's about the same amount of prostate cancer in Japan as there is in the United States. But this prostate cancer stays in the prostate gland in Japan. Post-World War II, there's 76 men died of prostate cancer in Japan. In this country, there are 150,000 cases of prostate cancer diagnosed, and about 50,000 men die of prostate cancer every year. And in Japan, they are rapidly escalating their death rate from prostate cancer to approach ours. What's the difference? Well, the difference, I believe, is on how you feed those tumors. You can have cancer-looking cells in your prostate or breast, but if you don't give them the fat and the cholesterol, you don't deprive them of the phytochemicals in the plants, they just stay where they are. They don't spread around the body and kill you. That's what I think is the difference. In women, here's a statistic that'll get you out of your chair. 40% of women in their 40s have ductal carcinoma in situ. If your doctor finds that in your breast, you will be told you have cancer. You will be treated with surgery, possibly radiation, possibly chemotherapy. You'll be treated as a full-dose cancer patient, but you don't have cancer, but that's how you'll be treated. 40% of women in this room have ductal carcinoma in their 40s. which in most cases never turns into cancer, but that's not the way you'll be treated. Be careful. Okay, so let's get back to our growth here, because I want you to understand why we have a problem. Okay, so we're at 2 years. We've got a division up to 100 cells, say in 2 years. The cancer has spread, starts to spread at this stage. We keep the divisions going till finally we are at 6 years in the development of cancer. We now have a tumor the size of a period on a paper, of a lead tip of a pencil. It's a millimeter in size. It contains 1 million cells. If it's truly cancer, remember, most of the prostate cancer and a good share of the breast cancer is not really cancer, because it never would spread or threaten a person's life. So if it really is cancer by this stage, it is spread to other parts of the body, okay? In essentially every case by 6 years of development on the average. You can't find it at this stage. It's not detectable by mammography or PSA or breast self-examination. It's not detectable. Now the divisions continue, and finally you're at 10 years of disease. You have a cancer that's 1 billion cells in content. It's the size of an eraser of a pencil. Now you can find it. Early detection is a misnomer. 2/3 of the disease has already occurred without the knowledge of the patient or the doctor. That's why we fail with early detection. It's not early detection, it's late detection. The earliest a tumor produces an elevation in PSA is when it's 10 years old, when it's a centimeter in size. It won't raise the PSA until it's been growing for 10 years. The earliest tumors you find on mammography are 8.5 to 10 years of age. By breast self-examination, they're 10 years old. Really, most tumors by mammography, because the ones you find in mammography are slow growing, most of those tumors have actually been growing for about 14 years. That's why the treatments don't work. If it's really cancer, it's spread to the whole body by the time you find it. The cattle are already out of the barn before you shut the door. That's the problem. And that's not going to change no matter how much hopeful and wishful thinking you have. Now let me tell you the good news about this. Let me have the chart up one time again. We see the average doubling time is every 100 days. That's average every 100 days. I just lost my sister-in-law. My brother, he's a physician. They have 2 children, 1 5, 1 7. She got breast cancer at age 27. We put her in the ground when she was 30. Left those children motherless. Her cancer doubled rapidly. I would guess every 24 or 30 days it doubled. And then there are women who get breast cancer who die of something else when they're 80, 90 years old. Their tumors double slowly. Some tumors double every 800 days. What you want to do is you want to change that doubling time. You want to change it from 24 days to, say, 700 days. If you get your tumors doubling every 700 days, you're going to die of breast cancer or prostate cancer when you're 157. And that's what I want. I want every one of my patients with prostate or breast cancer to die of breast cancer and prostate cancer when they're 95. Every single one of them. And I believe you can accomplish that. I published the first study on the dietary treatment of breast cancer back in the early 80s. First study ever published. Because I believed then what I believe now is you can change the course of cancer. You change it by stop fueling it. You change the doubling times. You slow the doubling times. That's what you want to do. We're all going to die. I mean, that's just part of the plan. We're all going to die. You just want to delay it as long as you can. And you'd like to die, my goal is I want to die when I'm 95 out jumping a wave with my windsurfer. That's my goal. I want to fall and break my neck, get eaten by a big white shark. So, you've got something there. I know everybody's got something planned. All right. So, get the positive message, and that is that I believe you can change the course of the disease. Even if you already have cancer, even if you're sitting there thinking, well, I probably got a little tumor growing in my breast and prostate, you probably do. Fine. Stop fueling it. Start eating a very low-fat, no added vegetable oil. These vegetable oils are toxic. In the last newsletter I published, you all get my newsletter, don't you? You don't? It's free. It's free. It's free. It's on the internet. You just go to my website and you get it. It's a great newsletter. I mean, I spent at least a week every month writing it. Mary puts in 4 recipes a month. The last newsletter talked about liver disease. The next one's going to be about pancreatic disease. There was an article about Dr. Atkins, you know Dr. Atkins, the high meat, high protein guy, he had a cardiac arrest and almost died in April. Won't admit it's his diet, but I'll show you why I believe it's his diet that almost killed him. In that same newsletter is a story about good fats, omega-3 fats. Omega-3 fats like flaxseed oil, fish oil, shows you how you increase the metastases by tenfold when you feed these omega-3, these good fats, to experimental animals. These things cause the cancer to just grow like mad. Oh, you want to know how to get the free newsletter, huh? You'll want to know how to get the free newsletter. And it really is free. There are no gimmicks involved. It's our way of keeping in contact with people, and it's a great newsletter. And you can print it out. So those of you who do not have computer savvy, if you've got a friend or a relative who gets on the internet, just tell them to go and print it out for you. It prints out very nicely. Okay, the website is very simple. It's www.drmcdougall.com. So that's DRMCDOUGALL. www.drmcdougall.com. Now, people make mistakes. They think there's one L. No, there's two L's. They think there's a period between Dr. and Mcdougall. There's not. It's DRMCDOUGALL. You go there, you just sign up for the free newsletter. It's sent to you every month online. It's a great newsletter. Okay, so is everybody clear about why early detection doesn't work and why treatment doesn't work? Are you all clear? This should be no mystery to you, all right? Now, you may not like it. You may not like it. I mean, I've gotten into all kinds of trouble with this explanation. I've had people, the same way with these PSA guys from the Western Journal of Medicine, I've had people tell me that I'm a murderer, that I have no compassion, I lack bedside manner, told me that I'm just a horrible person because I would dare say such a thing. You know, I understand what they're saying. I honestly do. I'm sorry. I don't mean to have people be hurt. I really don't. But I also think it's important you know the truth. And this is the truth. I published this the first, what I just showed you. If you look back, by the way, they have copies here. It's out of print. Mcdougall's Medicine, which was published in 1985. This exact story I published 17 years ago. It hasn't changed. It'll never change. Okay. So we have a little problem here, and the little problem is, am I okay?
Yeah, we're fine. We're going to take a little break.
All right, give me 5 minutes. We'll go, okay. We'll get a little bathroom break and so on. I haven't given this lecture before, so I didn't know how long it was going to take, and I didn't know how excited I'd be about giving it to you. But you're a great audience, so I've enjoyed talking to you about it. So let's talk about a problem here. A problem is this, is that what I tell you is drastically different than what you hear from most oncologists in the Cancer Society. They tell you, folks, we're winning the war on cancer. Just send a few more dollars. The cure is right around the corner. I mean, I'm 55. So I've been able to understand the human language well since I've been 4. So for 51 years, they've been telling me, a few more dollars. The cure is right around the corner. Now, not that we haven't done some good. We really have. We've helped leukemias, childhood cancers, lymphomas. We've done a lot of good there. But that represents maybe 4% of cancers. For somewhere between 85 and 95% of cancers, we haven't done anything worth anybody bragging about with billions and billions and billions of dollars spent. And it's not going to change. I wish it would, but it's not going to change. Okay, so you got me saying something very negative, very unpopular. You got somebody else saying something you want to hear, okay? How do we both stand up and tell you these things and act like we're telling the truth? It has to do with the definition and statistics. Let me show you how you cure cancer. How long do you have to live after diagnosis to be cured? 5 years. Okay, if you live 5 years after diagnosis, you're cured. Here's how you cure people with cancer. Here's the day you die. If you find it 1, 2, 3, say 4.5 years before you died, you were cured. Now, you introduce early detection, public awareness, you get people looking for these tumors with PSAs, breast self-examination, and so on. You cure hundreds of thousands of people. Hundreds of thousands, by the definition. There's the day you die. Now, if you find it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, say you found it 5.5 years before you died, now you were cured. You still died the same day, but you were now cured based on the definition. Honest to God, that's how most cancers are cured, by that definition and early detection. The Cancer Society says at the turn of the century that women who got breast cancer died in 2 to 3 years after diagnosis. Now, I've read the surgical reports of women who got breast cancer at the turn of the century. Their tumors are the size of grapefruits. or large oranges. They were embarrassed. They didn't have information. They came to the doctor 2 to 3 years before they died. Now we have women diligently searching their breasts for tumors pea-sized and smaller. They're finding them 10, 15, 20 years before the day of death. I have argued based on the scientific literature successfully to show you that the day of death is the same, whether you find it 15 years before, 20 years before, or 2 years before, or 2 days before. The day of death is the same. What's the difference? It's how long you know you're going to die. That's the difference. And there's one other big difference too. Who is always advantaged by early detection? Who always wins this game? Always. Those who administer the tests and treatments. This is not meant as sarcasm. It's not meant as a dirty stab in the back. It's meant as something that cannot be denied. Those that administer tests and treatments want you to know as long as possible that you're sick. Okay, so the disadvantages of screening, just to summarize, it increased death in young men and women because the treatments kill. You suffer with more disease awareness. Now you know you're sick for a longer period of time. You're labeled as a cancer victim. You're uninsurable. You suffer anxiety and distress from false diagnosis, unnecessary treatment from false diagnosis, increase in testing and treatment for everybody, false reassurance from false negatives. You see, you get a mammogram or a PSA and it's normal, well, that means the tumor is only a half a centimeter in size. You see, it's half the size of an eraser. That's all it means. Or 3/4 of the size. It's got to wait till it gets eraser size, maybe another doubling, and then you'll be a cancer victim. You have been reassured of nothing that's true. Physical discomfort, scars, incontinence, and impotence, an increased cost to the country and every individual. That's what early detection results in. And as I mentioned, the advantages are less radical treatment, reassurance from false negatives that some of you, or from negative results that some of you may get, and that's a strong incentive for better diet and lifestyle. Folks, if that's what you need, if you need to be told you have cancer to get it right, well, maybe you ought to go out and get a PSA or a digital rectal exam or your breast checked. If that's what you need to get your act together, do it. But I think most of you care more about your lives than to have to go to that radical of an extreme. I think there's enough in this God-given world. I just went to Alaska. I saw where God lives. The most beautiful place you've ever seen. And that's enough for me to want to be here every possible day on this wonderful earth. I don't need to be scared, and I don't think you do either. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Charmaine Vieira. I am standing here in front of Bella Vita Lifestyle Center. Through these doors, many suffering spiritually, mentally, and physically find relief and are filled with gratitude as God works on their heart. Great light has been given to God's church on health reform. As the right arm of the third angel's message, God's methods of treating disease will open doors for the entrance of present truth to prepare souls for the soon coming of Jesus Christ. Here at Modern Manna, we have successfully led the way in a cleansing and detoxifying program that not only touches the body, but also reaches to soul and spirit. We have found that Christ's method of ministry brings true healing. In Volume 7 of the Testimonies, page 62, we are told, "We have come to a time when every member of the church should take hold of the medical missionary work. RISEN, an acronym for our Remedial and Integrated School of Evangelism and Naturopathy, will empower you to answer the call to medical missionary work. Our program is based on the natural hygiene blueprint of the early pioneers, incorporating the 8 laws of health, cleansing, and detoxification. Learn how you can live optimally and coach people to healing from the diseases of lifestyle. Graduates of our Natural Hygiene Coach certification come from all around the world. They are motivated, resourceful, dedicated, and are making a difference through opening their own lifestyle education homes, coaching individuals, working within their local churches and communities, and broadening workplace wellness opportunities. Don't miss out on our upcoming 14-day Natural Hygiene Coach Certification Program. To find out how you can be involved with this amazing movement, visit us at www.modernmanna.org and click on Risen to register for the Fundamentals of Natural Hygiene. This online instruction is a prerequisite course that prepares you to successfully complete the Natural Hygiene Coach certification. Jesus says in Luke 10, verse 2, "The laborers are few." Now is the time to join us. He is waiting.